Hey folks, welcome back to this next video in this series. It sort of started out as a third-person shooter type thing, and now has sort of morphed into, I'm not sure what, some sort of military simulator. Anyway, I've been working on the HUD for the aircraft, and one thing that I've been sort of working on playing with from time to time is at some point I updated the JSBSim plugin to the latest version, and my multiplayer little hack stopped working, and so I wanted to redo that and do it in a probably more appropriate way, and I finally got that working, and so I think I'm going to just show what I did, because it ended up being, I mean, it took me at least a couple days with a lot of trial and error, and reading documentation and just going through all kinds of things to sort of get it right. And I don't want to redo it from the beginning, because it was a bit of a nightmare. So when I play now, I've got this menu, this widget that pops up that lets you choose what to spawn as, and I'll show that as well. But if I choose the F-16 in my server window, and then it'll spawn, and then let me break out of that window, and in my client window let me choose F-16 spawn, and now look at these. Let me this window looking back at the other one. There we go. So we got the two F-16s here, and the main thing that I wanted to show is that if I go into the client, hang on, I have to move this window around occasionally probably. If I go into the client window and I start manipulating the controls, you can see them in both windows, the client and the server. You can see the control surfaces moving. You can also see the lights. That one doesn't show very well because I'm behind the aircraft. How about these though? Those show just fine, both windows. And I turn those off, and then turn on the strobe. You can see in both windows it flashes, so that's working. And then in the client window, if I go ahead and undo the parking brake, give it a little throttle, you can see in both windows that it's moving. If I put on the parking brake in this one and hit break out of this window, go back into the server. Well, let me break out of this actually. Let's see if I can make this a little bit smaller so we can see both at the same time. I go into the server window, same thing. I move my control surface. You can see a move on the client. If I undo the parking brake and give it a little gas, you can see the aircraft moves. So everything's working great in multiplayer now. And I tested it with two clients as well to make sure that both clients could see each other, and that all worked. So everything's working fine now. So what I ended up having to do was I ended up having to create a class called in the plugin. So in the plugin, I've added a class called JSBSim aircraft that inherits from pawn. And it's got a C++ file as well. And basically what this is a base class that my Aspen aircraft class now inherits from. If we take a look, Aspen aircraft now inherits from JSBSim aircraft. And JSBSim aircraft is really pretty simple. It's got a root scene component in it, and then it's got two replicated variables for location and rotation of the aircraft, and it's got methods that fire when these values change. So if this value changes on the server, then it's going to replicate to all the clients as soon as it does so. So then I've got a function called set location and rotation, and then I've got a function called server set location and rotation that is an server RPC, and then I've got my replication method here that you have to override. So if we take a look at what happens now, inside the JSBSim movement component, I have a pointer to that aircraft class. That's the parent. So this gets filled in. I can't remember exactly where it gets filled in at. Probably maybe in the begin play. I put that up. There it is right there. So I get the owner and I cast it to a JSBSim aircraft. So since I have that parent, what I've done is in the tick component method, it looks like I then get the parent again. I don't really need to do this, but for whatever reason I have that in there. It goes through all the stuff it normally does. This is right here is where it calls the physics to JSBSim, step method. This is where it gets the values back from JSBSim after the sim runs. This is all straightforward, comes straight out of, I haven't modified anything until we get here. So this was the original code, and this is my new code right here, set location. We call that set location and rotation method that I created on the JSBSim aircraft. So then when that gets called, set location and rotation, I update the replicated variables, and that causes those methods to fire, and we'll look at those in a second. If this code is executing on the server, I simply do this again. I don't need to do this. This is pointless. I simply call this update transform method, and update transform just sets the world location and rotation of the root scene component. So really easy. If it's not the server, then it calls out to the server RPC, and the server then calls set location and rotation, which comes in, and now it has authority, and it calls update transform. So pretty straightforward. This looks a lot like a lot of multiplayer examples you'll find out there on YouTube and out on GitHub. There's nothing fancy here. And then the on-rep location and rotation, those do the same thing. They call update transform. So when replicated location and rotation gets set, it ends up calling these on all of the clients, and that calls update transform on the client, which then calls set world location rotation and causes the location rotation to update on the client. So that's how the movement of the aircraft is handled. To handle the control surfaces, what I ended up doing was in the movement component, I also have a method and let's see where I put it. Right here. So server set commands. So this basically tells the server what commands the client is executing. So we got flight commands and we got engine commands. There's probably some other things I'll have to add to this as I find issues. Like I think there's probably fuel tank information, maybe gear information that I need to include in this as well. But right now it's just passing the flight commands and the engine commands. And So if we take a look at the movement component C++, so in the copy to JSBSim, that's where all this information gets passed to JSBSim before the simulation executes. At the end of this method, I'm calling that server set commands, and really I should probably add a check here because we don't need to do it if we're on the server already, but at any rate, it doesn't matter. What happens is server set commands comes in and just updates those parameters. And what that causes to happen then is when the simulation executes on the server, it has the proper information to move the aircraft appropriately. So that then ends up causing the when the movement component later copies the information back from JSBSim, which happens in this method, all of these properties are correct on the server as well as on the client. So that means that the control surfaces move the same on both. So that's sort of how that is all working. One of these days I'll actually fork the JSBSim repository and put all this code in there so that maybe other people can go look at it, at least to get some idea how that's working. So that's how the replication of the aircraft movement and the control surface is working. The other thing I did, of course, is the widget that pops up that allows you to choose what you want to spawn as. I was just getting to the point where I needed some way to do this, so I just went ahead and added this widget. So the way this works is in the player controller blueprint. So I've added code in the player controller class. First of all, I guess I should show that. In the player controller class, I now have a spawn player function that takes in a class of pawn. And then I have a server spawn player RPC that takes in that same information. So if we take a look at those, spawn player just does that check for has authority. If it does have authority, it calls the spawn method. The spawn method then finds a player start and spawns the actor there and then possesses it. And then if it's on the client, it calls the server RPC, which then just calls that same method, and now it has authority. So this happens on the server, and it spawns the actor and it possesses it. I also had to add in the Aspen aircraft, and I'll have to add it into my character and my tank or ground vehicle class as well. I had to override the possessed by. So that's the method definition inside the aircraft header file. In the CPP file, if we take a look at that, what I had to do is this code that initializes the enhanced input system. It's in my begin play, but when the begin play executes on the server, the AI controller is the one that's controlling it, and so this code doesn't do anything. So in the possessed by, I had to execute it again because at this point now the controller possesses it and it can be properly initialized. So it's a little bit weird, but I had to add that to get it to work. And then if you look in my player controller C++ file one last time, I also have this acknowledged possession where I set up, the HUD if you're a player character, and if you're not, I initialize the ability system. So that's what that looks like. So then in my blueprint, my player character blueprint, or player controller blueprint actually. If we take a look at this guy, which inherits from that player controller class, and this is taking forever to open. I'll pause and wait for it. Okay, if we look here in my player controller blueprint, on the begin play, I am now creating a widget, which is widget blueprint underscore main underscore screen, which I'll show in a second, and then I'm adding it to the viewport, setting the input mode to UI, and showing the mouse cursor. Very simple to get that widget to show up. So then if we look at the widget itself, and it's this main screen widget, and obviously that's what it looks like when it shows up in the play window. If we look at this code, what's happening is I'm just grabbing the owning player controller. This is nonsense. I'm grabbing the owning player controller, casting it to BP Aspen player controller, and then I'm doing a switch on the string that's in the that drop-down box. And right now, the only thing I've tested is F16. So if you choose F16, it comes down and it calls that spawn player method on the player controller, and it passes in the F16 class. Then it sets input mode to game only, removes the widget, and takes the mouse cursor away. Although, honestly, I should probably still show the mouse cursor because I'll need to have it for the clickable cockpit that I hope to do later. But for now, I'm just leaving it off. And that's what that looks like. Also, really straightforward. Nothing fancy there at all. So that's how that all is hooked up. And if you run, you see on the server and on the client, it takes a minute because my machine is not the fastest, but widget pops up. Right now there's no, you're not a pawn. I should probably do some sort of spectator pawn thing here, but basically just I think it's putting the camera at 0, 0, 0. So you get to choose your pawn, you choose F16, you spawn, and now you have control, and again, all the control surfaces work on both windows, and everything's working well. So that's how I managed to pull that off. And like I said, I did not record it because it took me really most of the weekend to get that working properly. I had so much trial and error to get that working. It would have been just infuriating to watch. Nobody would have ever watched it. So that's why I didn't make a video until after I was done. So now that I'm done and I have that actually working, I can now, potentially start working on the weapon system, because I'll know that everything works in multiplayer. I kind of wanted to make that work before I got to implementing weapons, firing at each other, because it just wouldn't have worked properly. I wouldn't have been able to have two aircraft running at the same time and have it look right. So that's all working. Again, I need to go back and modify the ground vehicle and the player character class to put that enhanced input initialization in the possessed by as well. But I think that's probably the only thing I have left to do. So let me actually go ahead and do that and see if I can get these guys working. So if I go into, let's do ground vehicle first. Go into ground vehicle, and we will do virtual void. No. is this not? What am I inheriting from here? Wheeled vehicle pawn, which inherits from pawn. Let's take a look at the aircraft real quick. So it's in the protected. Let's just see what happens if I... Oh, I've already got it. Okay. So, I've already overridden that, so let's go take a look at... Well, let's look at begin play and grab this code right here. And then let's go to possessed by, yep, and paste it right in there. And then let me take a look at the character. Did I already override possessed by here as well? Yep. So we'll just dump it in right here as well. And stop and rerun the debugger with the latest code. I'll give that a few minutes to launch. I'll pause and start back up once it's ready. Okay, I'm back and everything's launched here, so let me run. And give that a minute to catch up. This old laptop needs time to catch up. There we go. So on the server, I'll launch as a T72. And I guess on the client, let's launch as a soldier. And we look over there, we can see the tank. And let me break out, come back, and can't remember what my controls are here. There's the fire button. And we can see the particle systems on both, and I can't fire because there's a cooldown. There we go. So we can see that on both. God, if I could remember. I don't remember what the controls are to turn the turret around. Let's take a look. Take a look back at the inputs. Where did I put the... There we go. Turret yaw. Okay, left and right arrows. There we go. So we can see the turret yaw on the client and on the server. So that's working like it should. Let's turn the camera around here so we can see the soldier. Break out of that window, come back into this one, and that's my fire button here. What the hell is my fire button? Gonna have to look at that as well. Alright. Close that. Open up my character here. Left mouse button. Okay, that makes sense. Let me move this up. Okay. And we can see all the bullets hitting. And we can see a muzzle flash as well. If I shoot this enough, it should explode, but I don't. It's probably takes a lot of times. I don't remember what values I used there for the damage. Okay, so I've got all three possible things you can play as working good in multiplayer. Well, the character's not perfect. I don't think the rotation is replicating properly, but I haven't looked at that yet, so that's a whole other thing. But for right now, the main thing I wanted to get was the aircraft. The aircraft's working perfectly in multiplayer. The tank really is too. It's just the character that's not exactly rotating properly, so I'll have to deal with that at some point. But for now, I'm going to probably keep concentrating on the aircraft. So now that it's working in multiplayer, I can probably start thinking about how I'm going to implement the weapons, which is a bit of a trick. I don't know quite how I'm going to handle it yet, but basically, the thing I need to implement is if we take a look at the F-16, and I'm going to think about pulling in an F-18 model as well, so that I could potentially pull in the aircraft carrier and see how difficult that might be to start implementing. But if we take a look at the F-16, it's got hard points for weapons on it, but only certain weapons can go in certain hard points. So, we've got these two hard points out here on the wingtips. Those can only take air-to-air missiles, as far as I know. And I think this hard point here and this hard point here are restricted to air-to-air type weapons instead, smaller weapons. These more inboard ones, and this one and the two that the fuel tank are currently attached to, those can take the bigger bombs, air-to-ground missiles, etc. And then there's actually, I don't know if this model really shows it, but there's hard points, there's a couple of different hard points, like over here I think there's a hard point where you can put some sort of targeting pod, and right in the middle you can put things as well. I'll have to actually do some research because I don't know exactly what can go where. But yeah, so I have to come up with some way where I can define on this aircraft what weapons are allowed to go on what hard points, and effectively, so that's probably going to be like a class called, well, I don't know if it's a class or if it's just a data table. I'm not sure yet. I need to think about that a little bit, but that's definitely coming soon. There's a few more things I wanted to add to the HUD. I actually put a place here for a G meter, even though I don't have a way to get that without modifying the JSBSim component a little bit more, because I need to expose a property that's not currently exposed in order to calculate that. I fixed these two MFDs just so that the text would show on them, be scaled properly. So I don't know if I'm going to do a little bit more work in the cockpit before I get to the weapons or what. I'm not sure exactly, but anyway, I'll figure out what I want to work on next, and so that'll be coming soon, hopefully. Hopefully I can make up my mind in the next week, and when I do, I'll record the next video. So until then, thanks.